When this man found out his daughter had fallen for the poorest kid in class, he started following the boy home every single day. But even with his car pushing 12 miles an hour, he still couldn't keep up. The boy just kept running, and the man could not believe what he was seeing. It didn't take long before the boy noticed him too. The man told him that if his speedometer was right, the kid was moving at 12 miles an hour, covering a full mile in about 5 minutes. But the boy just shrugged, told the teacher to quit following him, and took off across the fields like it was nothing. What neither of them knew yet was that this kind of speed wouldn't just change the boy's future. It was about to turn this down on his luck teacher's whole life around too. Jim had been a football coach at a big city high school. But during a team meeting one day, a cocky player kept talking over him, and Jim finally snapped. He threw a shoe straight at the kid's face. That one outburst cost him his job all over again. After a stunt like that, no school wanted anything to do with him. So Jim packed up his whole family and moved them to McFarland, one of the most run-down little farming towns in all of California. The second they arrived, Jim started wondering what part of America he'd landed in. The only restaurant in town didn't even have burgers on the menu, just simple Mexican tacos. And the moment they stepped back outside, a line of lowriders came cruising past, music blasting, guys calling out to his daughter. He hurried his family into the car and got out of there fast. But with barely any money to his name, he didn't have much of a choice. For now, they were staying. They had just arrived in McFarland, USA. When the local principal opened up Jim's file, he saw the full picture. Jim had cursed out students, gotten into a fist fight with a school board president, and been fired more than once for losing his temper with players. But this town was desperate for teachers, so the principal decided to take a chance on him anyway. Jim came on as the school's PE teacher. But on his very first day, before he even finished calling roll, 3 students got up and walked right out. Their parents needed them home to work the fields. On their way out, they even made fun of his name, joking that Jim sounded like something you'd find at a farmer's market. This time, though, he didn't blow up. He was only here to collect a paycheck, save a little, and move on. Still, compared to the big city, the people out here were surprisingly kind. Just 2 days in, a neighbor showed up at his door with a live hen as a welcome gift. Jim couldn't bring himself to kill the thing, so he headed down to the general store for some chicken feed. When the shop owner heard Jim was raising a chicken, he figured the man planned to stick around, so he offered him a young sapling. He promised that in 5 years it would grow tall enough to shade the whole yard and keep the sun from scorching his plants. But Jim turned him down flat. There was no way he was going to be here in 5 years. Walking out with an ice-cold soda in hand, he spotted a group of his own students gulping water straight from a car wash hose. Jim asked around and learned these kids had been out here since 5 in the morning, washing cars for spare change. And once they finished, they'd spend the rest of the day out in the fields. Every weekday, they were up by 4:30, barely awake, helping their families bring in the harvest before rushing off to school. They laughed and joked with each other along the way, but the dust kicking up all around them told a much harder truth about the life waiting for them. The English teacher filled Jim in. Almost everyone in town came from hardworking Mexican immigrant families who had been farming this land for generations. The school even sat right next to a prison. Once these kids finished school, it was either the fields or a jail cell. There was no third door to walk through. And even if one of them somehow got into college, no family here could cover tens of thousands of dollars a year in tuition. She knew Jim wasn't planning to stay, but she asked him anyway to take his classes seriously. She said even if all he ever gave them was a few good high school memories, that alone would be one of the rare bright spots in their lives. But Jim's heart just wasn't in it, and he figured there was nothing he could do to change any of it. In class, he barely tried. He'd send the kids off to run laps, then sit back and eat his breakfast. That's when he started to notice something. These kids weren't just fast. They ran lap after lap after lap and never seemed to tire. After school one day, Jim watched a student running all the way home. His daughter told him the boy's name was Thomas. And Thomas didn't just run far, he ran unbelievably fast. That's when it clicked for Jim. These kids ate huge amounts of carbs every day, which gave them a bottomless tank of energy. Years under that brutal California sun had built up their tolerance for the heat. They were practically born to run. The very next day, Jim brought the principal a flyer for the first ever California cross-country state championship and pitched the idea of starting a team. The principal waved it off. He said cross-country was a rich school thing. They had no money and no coach for it. It just wasn't going to happen. But Jim had already dug into the old race times, and he'd found that Thomas could easily crack the top 10 in the whole state. On top of that, the state's public education system had added funding for 6 new sports a few years back, and cross country was one of them. With the money already there, the principal had nothing left to argue about. He told Jim to go for it. So Jim tracked down Johnny, the fastest kid in class, and asked him to round up 7 guys for the team. And he made sure Thomas was on the list. Johnny pulled in Victor and the 3 Diaz brothers pretty quickly, but Thomas turned him down. Still 2 runners short, Jim happened to catch Jose, the 3rd fastest kid in class, getting chewed out by the football coach for stealing coins from a vending machine. Jim jumped in and covered for him, claiming it was his own change stuck in the machine and that he'd asked Jose to help him fish it out. He even bought the kid a drink. That made runner number 6. Meanwhile, Thomas got into a fight with a classmate for talking trash about his sister. With a little help from the principal smoothing things over, the team finally landed its star. When Victor saw that chubby Danny had made the roster, he wasn't thrilled. He figured Danny would just slow everyone down. But the coach explained that Danny was the key to the whole thing. Without him, his 2 brothers would walk. When the team came running past the general store during practice, the shop owner could hardly believe his eyes. These were the town troublemakers, and here they were, actually training with a teacher. He joked that now he really had seen everything. He spotted Jim slumped against the storefront, completely out of breath, and handed him a cold soda, thanking him for what he was doing for the town. The boys trained hard. Even Danny, who kept falling far behind the pack, refused to quit halfway. He gritted his teeth and finished every time. But when they stopped for water, Jim noticed something that stuck with him. Every single one of their shoes was falling apart, and those were the best pair each of them owned. Eventually, the summer heat faded, and October brought the Palo Alto Invitational. Jim reached into his own pocket to buy the team-matching uniforms and some running shoes he'd found on discount. The boys said the gear looked ugly, but they were already lacing them up. The rules of cross-country are simple. First place is worth 1 point, second is worth 2, and so on down the line. Only a team's top 5 finishers count. Add up their numbers, and the lowest total wins. When the other teams saw the McFarland kids show up, they started running their mouths. The boys didn't fire back. They swallowed it all and saved it for the course.
Go, go, go!
But when the other schools realized they couldn't beat Thomas on flat ground, 2 runners teamed up to play dirty, boxing him in from both sides. One look at Thomas and you'd know nobody was holding him back for long. Yet the moment they hit the hills, Thomas, who had led the whole race, got swallowed up and passed. The entire team finished near the very back, dead last in the final standings, with Danny trailing far behind as usual. But this time the coach didn't point fingers at anyone. He took the blame himself. He admitted he'd failed to scout the course beforehand and never knew there was a mountain waiting out there. He told the boys not to give up. He reminded them that their future was so much bigger than one bad race. Back home, though, Jim was still frustrated. Finishes like that were never going to get him back to a big city job. His wife didn't care about the money at all. She just wanted him around more, and she reminded him not to forget their daughter's birthday cake the next day. Determined not to repeat the same mistake, the coach cranked up the training. Since there wasn't a single hill nearby, he found a crop storage facility and turned the giant almond mounds into makeshift hill courses, sending the team up and over them again and again. The training was brutal, no question.
We don't back down, they won't either.
But what hurt even more was getting past right at the finish line. It was that gut punch of realizing, after you'd already lost, that you never gave it everything you had. He wanted them to train until they actually loved the sight of a hill. The steeper, the better. When the coach called for one more lap, Thomas hesitated. The rest of the team was told they could rest, but Thomas wouldn't stop. He didn't even understand the point of any of it anymore. Thomas was boiling over. He believed that no matter how hard any of them worked, they'd never be runners. They were pickers, and in his mind, they'd always be pickers. And that thought filled him with rage and frustration he couldn't hold in. When Thomas tripped and hit the ground, he slammed his fists into the dirt and screamed. It was the kind of rage that comes from pure despair, a howl at how unfair all of it was. Those hills in front of him looked like every obstacle life had ever thrown at him. He knew you had to reach the top to see the world spread out below. But right now he was lost in the trees at the bottom of the mountain, and the weight of everything real was pressing down on him like a canopy of branches, blocking out the sky, hiding any path forward. Broken inside, Thomas quit the team that night. Jim got home only to realize he'd forgotten the birthday cake after all. His daughter was so hurt, she wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk, wouldn't even look at him. So Jim climbed back in the car and drove into the city in the middle of the night to buy one. On the way, he spotted someone sitting alone on an overpass. As he got closer, he saw that it was Thomas. His face was bruised and he looked like he was in real pain. Life had been anything but kind to this kid. His teenage sister had gotten pregnant, which piled even more pressure on the family. His father, who kept them all afloat with odd jobs, had lost his temper and started punching the walls. Thomas tried to stop him and caught a stray blow. And since his father's hands were the only thing keeping the family fed, an injury like that meant everyone would go hungry. Now, for the first time, Jim truly understood what these kids were carrying. He needed to get Thomas off that ledge. So he opened up about forgetting his own daughter's birthday just to lower the kid's guard. Then he pointed out that a fall from this height wouldn't even do the job. It would just shatter his legs and then he'd never run again, and he really would become a burden on his family. The second Thomas was distracted, Jim grabbed him and pulled him back to safety. From that night on, Jim threw himself into learning everything he could about distance running. He got serious about coaching because he finally saw that running was the one real shot these kids had at taking control of their own future. He started hunting down every kind of terrain he could find for training. Every day he rode alongside them on his little daughter's tiny bike, coaching them the entire way. After a few more weeks, they earned a shot at a dual meet, just 2 teams head-to-head. But the opponent was highly ranked, an elite squad that assumed McFarland would be an easy warm-up. The other team held the lead for most of the race, and their coach even mocked Jim from the sidelines. But all that extra training was paying off.
16:30, Thomas, good job.
The boys dug deep and pulled it out, winning by a single point in the final team score. For kids who had been grinding for so long with nothing to show for it, this was their first real taste of hope. But right after that win, the 3 Diaz brothers dropped off the team. Confused, Jim drove out to their house to find out why. He happened to arrive right at dinner time, and their mother insisted he stay and eat. She kept piling food onto his plate, and once he was stuffed to the point of bursting, she packed up a whole container more for him to take home to his family. Overwhelmed by all that kindness, Jim couldn't bring himself to raise the subject. It wasn't until he was already heading out the door that the boy's father saw right through the whole visit and told him the truth. The father was a crew foreman with a daily harvest quota to hit. Every hour the boys spent training was an hour lost in the fields, and that meant less money coming in. Out here, running was a luxury. It was like a television set, nice to have, but not something a family could actually afford. So to free up their training time, Jim decided to help the brothers meet their quota. That weekend, before the sun was even up, he joined them out in the fields, picking crops right alongside them. The brothers had been doing this since they were 10 years old. The more ground they covered, the more their father brought home. On his first day out there, Jim couldn't keep up with anybody. Halfway through, his back was screaming. Once the day's work was done, they mapped out a training schedule together. Late harvest days meant late practice. Race days meant getting the picking done early. And whenever they needed him, Jim would be right there in the dirt helping out. By stepping into his students' lives like that, Jim finally earned their respect. For the very first time, the boys called him Coach. By the time he got home, he was so wiped out he didn't even bother changing his clothes. He just collapsed onto the bed and passed out cold, and the help ran both ways. The next day, the students' parents showed up at Jim's house and started making tamales to sell. They sent the kids out to wash cars, put together a fundraiser, and raised enough money to finally get the whole team a proper pair of running shoes. Before long, the McFarland Cougars and their underdog story made it into the local newspaper. The English teacher brought even better news. Jose, the kid who used to be a petty thief, had become a completely different person after joining the team. In an essay for her class, he wrote about flying like blackbirds through the orange groves, floating on a warm wind. He wrote that when they ran, the whole earth belonged to them, that the land was theirs, that they spoke the language of the birds. Out there, they weren't immigrants anymore, weren't outsiders, weren't anyone's idea of stupid. When they ran, their spirits took flight. When they ran, he wrote, they spoke to the gods. When they ran, they were the gods. The English teacher read it with tears in her eyes, and she thanked Jim from the bottom of her heart for everything he'd done. And in that moment, Jim finally understood that this had never really been about padding his resume so he could land a job somewhere better. If the boys kept winning, they'd qualify for the state championship and have a genuine shot at college scholarships. So he told them to dream big. He told them to start picturing which college they wanted to attend, because a degree was the one thing that could lift them out of a lifetime in the fields and give their families a real future. But when Thomas brought the news home, his father told him to drop out of school instead. He said farmers didn't need all that education. And it wasn't that the man was small-minded. It was just that without a scholarship, there was simply no way the family could ever afford tuition. At the next race, a rival coach quietly slipped Jim a business card. Principals from other schools had started noticing what Jim could do. But after a full year with these kids, walking away didn't feel so easy anymore. In this race, the boys carried themselves with real confidence, and their opponents didn't dare take them lightly. The course was nothing but mountains. Jim told his team that when they were climbing and it started to hurt, they needed to remember that everyone out there was hurting just as much. After all those countless training runs, even Danny, the slowest guy on the squad, was now passing runners on the uphill. But near the finish, Thomas, who had been leading again, took a fall that cost the team precious points. They were right on the bubble to qualify. The boys stared up at the scoreboard, hearts pounding. And when the officials posted McFarland in 4th place, all that grinding had finally paid off. They had qualified for the state championship. They finally had their shot at college. On the way home, Jim pulled over at a beach park. He wanted these kids who had never once seen the ocean to celebrate right there by the sea. The only problem was the entrance fee was $9 and Jim only had $5 on him. Luckily, a kind-hearted guard just waved them all in for free. The setting sun washed over the boys in golden light, catching faces that were full of hope. They ran straight into the waves, celebrating everything they'd earned. And in that moment, they seemed to wash away the dust of their old lives and catch their first glimpse of something different. For once, the road ahead was shining right beneath their feet. Jim asked the shop owner to make a poster announcing that McFarland was headed to the California State Championship. The owner was over the moon. This was the first time in 25 years that anyone from this tiny town had made it to a competition this big. He even closed up shop for a full day, something he never did. To make up for missing his daughter's birthday, Jim sent his wife and both girls out early to get their hair done. Then he quietly invited a whole crowd of parents over to help him throw a surprise party. When his daughter walked back in the door, she got the shock of her life. She slipped into her dress and Thomas showed up in a suit. The band started playing and her father asked her for a dance, celebrating his little girl becoming a young woman. The town's car club rolled up too and invited the birthday girl to come along for a ride. Once Jim learned it was a local tradition, he let her go. But he made Thomas promise to look after her no matter what. They'd barely made it a block, right by the general store, when an old rival caught up with the car club's leader, a man who had just gotten out of prison. By the time Jim rushed over, his daughter's knees were badly scraped, and the leader had been slashed. A violent street attack less than half a mile from his own front door shook Jim to the core. The next morning, he saw the shop owner out there scrubbing the sidewalk clean. Jim pulled out that coach's business card and drove to Palo Alto High in the city. The interview went perfectly. They had top-of-the-line athletic facilities, and Jim would be promoted to department head, the exact position he'd always dreamed of. Still, he wanted to know how his daughter felt about it first. As it turned out, Thomas was there too, and he confronted Jim, asking if he was really just going to abandon them. Jim had no answer. That night, he asked his wife whether they should take it. Moving meant a nicer neighborhood, better schools for the girls, and a much bigger paycheck. But his wife had fallen in love with this place. For years, they'd bounced from city to city, chasing his career, and nowhere had ever felt like home the way McFarland did. She reminded him that the night their daughter got hurt, it was because the boys had jumped in to protect her and knocked her down by accident. People anywhere else, she said, would never have done that. After a lot of back and forth, Jim decided to stay, at least for now. If nothing else, he was going to see these boys through to the state championship. On race day, the whole town turned out, waving American and state flags. As the national anthem played, every moment of their long journey together flashed through Jim's mind. For the first time in their lives, these boys held their own fate in their hands. How far they'd go was entirely up to them now. Jim pulled the team in for one last talk. He fired them up and told them they were about to be better than they'd ever been. And then the championship race began. Jose, hungry for a big result, shot out ahead of everyone right from the start.
Back it down. Find your pace.
You're fast, gonna die!
Then make up for it. Make up for it.
But burning that hard so early drained his tank fast, and he began to fade. Thankfully, Thomas came through. He was the first runner to appear on the final stretch, taking the individual title by the thinnest of margins. As the rest of the team crossed the line, the coach frantically searched for Jose. He was a full minute slower than his training pace. The championship suddenly felt out of reach, and just when hope was slipping away, a miracle happened. Danny, of all people, found another gear out of nowhere, blowing past a wall of runners to finish as the team's crucial fifth scorer, clawing back every single point Jose had lost. Then the judge announced it. The first ever California State cross-country champions were the McFarland Cougars. The boys hoisted Danny up onto their shoulders. He had just done the unthinkable. The Palo Alto coach came to Jim one final time and asked again if he wanted to make the jump. But after watching the incredible transformation in these boys, Jim had made up his mind. He was staying. He had found his purpose right here. Over the next 14 years, McFarland High's cross-country team won 9 state championships. Jim stayed on as their coach, finally retiring in 2003 and settling down in McFarland for good. And every one of those 7 runners from the 1987 team went on to college and built a solid life. Even now, in their middle age, they still come back every year to run alongside the new team, inspiring the next generation to rewrite their own fate. So the moral of the story is never call poor kids hopeless, because sometimes they're just carrying their family, their pain, and their future on legs nobody believed in.